Last week was Parshat Ḥukat, which really focuses on Israel's military confrontations with the other nations, right? And this week, Parshat Balak, the focus is on our spiritual confrontations with the other nations. What is our spiritual message, and why is that frightening to the international community, or at least this region at the time? And the one thing the Torah is showing us here, by the way, is Balak, Bilaam, the elders of Midian, they only really begin to care about what Israel has to say once we matter. When do we matter? How do we begin to matter? When we start to win, when we're strong. Right? The fact that Israel is winning wars, defeating powerful Amorite kings, means what we have to say is important. Because we've just basically come out of the desert after 40 years of hibernation, right? We came out of Egypt, the superpower of the world was basically brought to its knees. Its economy destroyed, its military destroyed. Israel, this slave population, emerges to freedom and then goes deep into the desert where humans can't live, right? We survive in the desert for roughly 4 decades through miracles. The man, the clouds, the well of Miriam, and then we emerge. And when we emerge, we begin to conquer territory. And because of what people might suspect, we believe, and we're going to try to promote, now we are a threat, right? According to the Shem MiShmuel, what was Balak's problem with Israel? What was concerning Moab and Midian about Israel? According to the Shem MiShmuel, it's that we were coming with a message that statecraft, economics, warfare, just running a society is holy. And they had separated religion and state. They basically said you could be holy as an individual, you can go to whatever idolatrous temple and be holy there, be a spiritual person there, but spirituality has no place in government. Spirituality has no place in the army. Spirituality has no place in the economy. And therefore, Israel is deeply threatening, because Israel is coming with a message that no, all of those things can be uplifted to the divine ideal. All of those things can be material manifestations and expressions of our highest spiritual values. Moab and Midian, I want to kind of paint a picture of the geopolitical situation. Like, what is the connection between Moab and Midian? Why are they concerned with Israel? And then who is Bilaam? Because that's really important for us. Because the Torah is showing us something through Bilaam. Right? Bilaam represents something that we need to understand. Okay? So first of all, it makes sense to me that Moab is a vassal to Midian. That Midian is the more powerful of the two. And there's even opinions of our sages that Balak, the king of Moab, is himself a Midianite. Right, so you have Moab existing with the Midianite king. Remember, Moab, we are actually at this point, Israel is in control of the territory, or a lot of the territory of Moab. There's a Moabite population living under Israel at this point, because we didn't take it from Moab, we took it from Sichon, the Melech of the Amorim. Right? So we basically conquered territory from Sichon. This is later going to become an issue for Yiftach. We saw it in last week's Haftorah, right? That Yiftach refutes the accusations that we took Moabite territory. We took Moabite territory from Sichon, who took it from the Moabites. But we didn't take it from the Moabites. Okay? And it's likely now that we have a Moabite population living under us, living in the territory we conquered. That explains probably how the Moabite women had access to the Israelite camp, like how they were so close. And Midian is far away. Midian has very little to do with what's going on here, except for the fact that our sages tell us Balak, the king of Moab, the new king of Moab, is a Midianite. Now Midian has a different issue with us. Remember, Midian is a son of Avraham Avinu. Like, Midian is one of the sons of Avraham of Keturah at the end of his life. And Moshe, early in his career, right, Moshe kills an Egyptian for beating a Jew. which I think we should understand is Moshe trying to launch a slave revolt. That doesn't happen, meaning nobody else begins to fight. None of the Hebrews start fighting. In fact, the opposite. They threaten to turn him in, and he leaves. He despairs of Israel. He believes that Israel are such slaves that you cannot expect them to revolt against the Egyptians. They're a lost cause. And he goes to Midian, and he marries a daughter of Yitro. What's the kavanah? To create a new Hebrew nation to replace Israel. And this is actually something Hashem offers him later, tests him. At this point, Hashem coerces him away from it. He says, no, the burning bush. No, it has to be Israel. Go rescue Israel. Liberate Israel. Which Moshe was very hesitant to do. But later, we see in the incident of the golden calf and in the incident of the spies, the Kadosh Baruch Hu offers Moshe the opportunity to create a new nation to replace Israel. And Moshe says no. Obviously it's a test. Moshe says no, which means he internalized on his own the importance of the mission that the Creator entrusted him with, and that it has to come through Israel, and that Israel needs to be brought to the point where we are capable of doing it. We can't be replaced by another nation. So Midian occupies a very important place in Moshe's journey. And it's not for nothing that the last mitzvah that Moshe will be entrusted with is to destroy Midian, is to war against Midian. Meaning there's something that Moshe is actually overcoming inside himself. There's growth taking place, even at the age of 120 years old. There's growth taking place for Moshe through this mitzvah of fighting Midian. Because Midian, at one point in his life, was a potential replacement for Israel. And it could be that the Midianites know this. But they come as a spiritual enemy to Israel. They come with a value system that's actually different. Again, Yitro's cool. Yitro and his descendants are the Kenim. They're our allies. We're good with them. But the broader Midianite population did not follow in the path of Yitro. Right? And they come against us here. And they go and they elicit help from Bilaam. Now, according to our sages, Bilaam had actually helped. Bilaam and his father had helped Sichon defeat the Moabites. And that's how Balak knows about him. Or knows of his relevancy to this. Now, what's interesting, we're taught that Bilaam is a bad guy. We're taught that Bilaam is a villain, right? He's an antagonist in our story. But if we examine Bilaam's behavior and his words here in the Parsha, he doesn't seem like that much of a bad guy. Every time he talks about the Creator, he uses the Hebrew names, right? Yud-Ke, Vav-Ke, Shaddai. He makes it very clear over and over again that I cannot do anything other than what Hashem lets me do. Right? He basically expresses loyalty to the Creator and even uses the Hebrew names of the Creator. Doesn't seem like much of a bad guy. Later, in Sefer Bamidbar and in Sefer Devarim, and certainly in the writings of our sages, in Torah Shebal Peh, we see that Bilaam is a problematic figure. But we should understand that Bilaam is a Hebrew. Right? Bilaam is a Hebrew prophet. He's not Israel. Right? And when we understand Bilaam, we begin to understand our relationship with the non-Israelite Hebrews. Remember, there's an identity called the Hebrews, the Ivrim, the descendants of Ever, okay, that people knew about. We knew, for example, when Yosef is in Mitzrayim, Potiphar's wife refers to him as an Ivri, as a Hebrew. When he's in prison and he says, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, people know what he's talking about. There's a group, a known identity in the world called the Hebrews, the Ivrim. And the Ivrim basically had a certain understanding of the Creator, a certain relationship with the Creator, and a certain desire to spread that, to share that in a very idolatrous world. Right? There's Ever, and there's Peleg, and there's Re'u, and there's Serug, and there's Nachor, and there's Terach, and then Terach has his three sons. Right? Avraham, Nachor, and Haran. By the way, it's very interesting when you see their fate, when you see what happens to these three sons of Terach, which is essentially the Hebrew identity at this point, right? The Ramban teaches us that Maaseh Avot Siman Banim, that the deeds of the ancestors are signs for the descendants, right? You see, 1/3 of this Hebrew identity is killed in an oven. 1/3 goes to Aram, to the cosmopolitan center of the region at the time, but after a couple of generations, he's not an Ivri anymore; he becomes an Arami, right? Like his descendants become Aramim. And the third, Avraham, goes to the land of Israel to create a nation. That's exactly what happened to the Jewish people in the 20th century. 1/3 killed in an oven, 1/3 went to the United States to become Americans, and 1/3 came to Palestine to build the nation of Israel, right? So you see that very clearly with the sons of Terach, that it's the same pattern repeating itself. Now, Nahor basically was like all the Hebrews before, right? He believed you can achieve the Hebrew mission by living in the greatest cities among the most enlightened Gentiles, right? Berlin, Paris, London, New York, right? And you spread the Torah. You spread the teachings of the Creator, whatever those were, right? Remember, there's a yeshiva of Shem and Ever. We learned that Yaakov, our ancestor Yaakov, learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, meaning there were Hebrew teachings being taught if we were interested, for those who were interested. What made Avraham different?
You went out to call out.
What makes Avraham different? What makes Avraham different is that he did jihad. Is that he took a militant posture towards idolatry. He went out and initiated conflict with the idolatrous world in order to smash idols. And he is chosen to be the progenitor of the Hebrew nation, the nation of Israel, which are in relation to the other Hebrews, the radical splinter group. Okay? And that is how Bilaam is looking at this nation of Israel. Bilaam is a moderate Hebrew. Bilaam could be, he's basically, I don't know if I want to bring contemporary comparisons, but you can imagine Bilaam as like the chief rabbi of a very civilized Western country where all the Gentiles respect him, and Bilaam is totally against what he considers to be Jewish fundamentalism, Jewish extremism, right? Hebrew extremism, which is found in the nation of Israel, the descendants of Avraham. Remember, there's a long-standing conflict between the descendants of Nahor and Avraham. Nahor believes you live in, like Torah im derech eretz, right? Like Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, you live in the most enlightened cosmopolitan Gentile centers and you spread the light of Torah. But what happens when you do that? You end up spreading that light within the context of their value system. You show what good Germans we can be, right? Oh, look at our Torah. Our Torah makes us such good Germans. Or our Torah makes us such good Americans, right? You're somehow emphasizing the features of the Torah that make us good according to the yardstick of what's good of the civilization we're living in. And that, therefore, Nahor's family go from being Ivrim to Aramim. Avraham's approach, the approach Hashem imposes on him, right? Avraham was doing something very different before Lech Lecha. He might have been more militant than Nahor. He might have been taking a more aggressive posture. And he might have been more successful than Nahor. But he's basically like a spiritual leader, with a big movement, traveling around, in conflict with Nimrod. But then his second mission, Lech Lecha, is to create a nation in a very specific land. And when you create a nation, first of all, we needed to create a nation because the rest of humanity had been kind of divided into nations by that time, right? After the flood, the children of Shem, the children of Ham, go from being mishpachot to being goyim. You see in the end of Parshat Noach. So now there needs to be a goy that's the Hebrew goy, a Hebrew nation, that's going to create a situation where all the families of the world are blessed, right? Meaning one of the goals of Israeli national existence is to eliminate nationalism, to turn all the nations back into families. And that's what it says in the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, right? That where all the mishpachot are going to be blessed through us. All the families of the earth are going to be blessed through us. But for that, we have to be a nation at the seat, at the table of nations. We have to have a seat at the table, right? In order to bring humanity to the awareness of Hashem's oneness through a nation that doesn't just sanctify personal religious life, but economic life, governmental life, a sanitation system, an army, a transportation system, an education system, a healthcare system, minority rights, right? To show that a nation can be holy, can express, again, to materialize in this world our deepest and highest and loftiest spiritual concepts, right? That's a nation. Right? And that's the approach of Avraham. And there was a time when Lavan, the grandson of Nahor, really believed that he had won over Yaakov. Right? You see that Lavan's attitude towards Yaakov changes when Yaakov makes clear to him, I'm going back to my land. But it's not by accident that most of our matriarchs come from the branch of Nahor, because we need that cosmopolitan impulse in us. We need that to be part of who we are, but it's not the dominant part of who we are. Right? The dominant part of who we are comes from the line of Avraham. But there's also that universalist element that's important. More universal than cosmopolitan, but there's a subtle distinction there. So Bilaam is loyal to Hashem, wants to do the will of Hashem, but he can't stand Israel. He doesn't like, it's hard for him to accept that Hashem's plan for humanity is going to come through Israel. That Israel is now the tool, right? Remember, we're not the recipients of the Torah. Israel are not the recipients of the Torah. Israel are the co-authors of the Torah. Humanity are the recipients of the Torah. Meaning, we are meant to take the Torah from Sinai to Tzion, right? Ki Tzion tetzeh Torah udva Hashem Yerushalayim. Not from Sinai, but from Tzion, from Yerushalayim. We're meant to process it, but we co-author it by living it as a nation for centuries in our land. And by doing that, we make it accessible to the rest of the world. If we didn't do that, if we just had the Chumash and we never processed it and turned it into the Tanakh, by living it as a nation for centuries, the other nations couldn't have accessed it, for better or for worse. Huh? But ultimately, humanity are the recipients of the Torah, but Israel is Hashem's educational tool for bringing humanity to the awareness of His oneness. And our connection to each other, obviously. Right? Because if we understand His oneness, that everything is one, then we understand that we're all connected. And that comes through the nation of Israel. Like Yeshayahu says, Amzu yitzarti liti l'tisaperu. Right? This nation have I created for myself to sing my praise, meaning it's through, like we say in the Amidah, right? That Hashem recalls the chesed of the Avot and brings a redeemer to their descendants, the Jewish people, lima'an shemo, for the sake of His name, for the sake of His ideal, for the sake of how His ideal is perceived in this world through the historic adventure of Israel. Right? Through the story of this nation, the rest of humanity will come to understand that there is a creator and an author to history, and that we are all one. So Bilaam, even though he's loyal to Hashem, and he's a Hebrew, and he's a prophet, he has a problem with the fact that Israel is playing a central role in the divine plan. This bothers him. He doesn't want to oppose Hashem, but he doesn't like it. It's hard for him to accept that this is really the divine plan. Can it be changed? And every time he tries to curse Israel, he ends up blessing them. What really makes him a bad guy, in my opinion, here is, okay, he had an opinion, he thought he was right, maybe it's lishma. But at the end, when he saw every time he tried to curse, he blesses, he gives advice on how to defeat us I think that's really where we see his character coming out. We see the problem. And our sages in Pirkei Avot, I think it's in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, describe Bilaam as having 3 character traits, 3 major character traits, right? An evil eye, arrogance, and greed. Those are like the 3 traits of Bilaam. But the truth is, if we really examine these traits, they're not necessarily terrible on the surface. Meaning, when we're saying evil eye, as opposed to like a good eye, judging people favorably versus unfavorably, maybe it could be argued that, people, even tzaddikim, who are more of the disposition of gvura, not chesed, right? They tend to be more judgmental in how they look at other people. Okay, not necessarily a bad thing. You could say maybe it needs balance. Maybe it's not. It has its place. We learned that Yitzchak Avinu was that way. Sarah Imenu was that way, right? To a certain extent. When our sages call him arrogant, I mean, let's be honest. He was one of the major spiritual figures of the ancient world. Like, his understanding of himself, his opinion of himself, is probably very grounded in reality. Right? Sure, he could have been more humble, but at the end of the day, it's not untrue, his understanding of himself, right? He is a recognized spiritual leader among humanity. And when we talk about Bilaam being greedy, I don't think it makes sense for us to think of him as greedy for money. I know that sometimes we interpret the fact that he says to Balak, even if you gave me all this wealth, I still can't curse Israel, as like a hint, give me all the wealth, and then I'll be able to curse them. I don't think so, because he even keeps saying that when it's not working. And somebody like Bilaam, I don't think he's greedy for material wealth, but I do think people of that caliber are often greedy to play meaningful roles in big historic events. That they're like, they want to make, like there's something big happening, right? Israel came out of Egypt. The Egyptian economy, for the most part, crashed, right? The Egyptian military was destroyed. The superpower was brought to its knees. Israel goes and hibernates in the desert for 40 years in a place where most humans can't even go. And then they emerge and start conquering, and maybe Bilaam was feeling left out.
Like cloud chaser.
Maybe he wanted to either be part of it or oppose it. And I think his inclination is this is wrong because Israel is coming to completely overturn the global order. Right? We're not just conquering land. We are coming to conquer land. We're coming to conquer the land of Canaan, which is also known, by the way, as Eretz Ivrim, meaning there's this whole understanding of how the Canaanim conquered the land from the Ivrim, and that's why Avraham, we find him at the beginning of his story in Ur Kasdim. Because when Yosef is in prison and says, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, everybody knows where that is. Meaning that the world understood this land to be the land of the Hebrews and the land of Canaan. And Melchizedek, who we understand to be Shem, was the king of Yerushalayim, Melech Shalem, right? So Bilaam benefited from the global order as it existed, right? Bilaam was a very successful, highly respected spiritual leader to kings, right? Why should he want all of that upended? Why should he want that overturned? He doesn't. It's a good system as far as Bilaam's concerned. But the problem with what we can call the moderate Hebrews is they were accepting of idolatry. They didn't do it themselves, maybe, but they were tolerant of it. They said, you have your religion and I have my religion, and I think mine is true, and if you want to come learn about it, I'll teach you, but in the meantime, you do yours. Right? That was the pre-Israelite Hebrew approach. That was a big machloket between Avraham and the rest. Avraham said, no, we have to smash the idols. We have to liberate humanity from the poison of idolatry. Right? And Bilaam is existing in an idolatrous world, in a corrupt world, as a moral, spiritual individual who is given a lot of kavod and a certain degree of power and influence because he's a moral, spiritual individual in an otherwise, corrupt, immoral, idolatrous world. So he has an incentive to... and I think the real problem with Bilaam is that he had the perspective of Balak. By the way, Balak, the Moabites don't seem to really have any consequence from all this. We go to war with Midian. Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen kills Bilaam, right? But Moab, we don't really go after, right? Maybe they were just acting in self-defense. Maybe they had an understanding of geopolitics that was a reasonable understanding for somebody like Balak. But we should expect more from Bilaam because he's a prophet. Meaning that Bilaam is not supposed to think like Balak. Bilaam is supposed to... And when we do see his nivuah reaches far into the future. Meaning a prophet of that stature shouldn't limit himself to the perspective of a transient king and just see the events unfolding from the perspective of a local ruler. He should understand there's a purpose to history. There's a meaning to Am Yisrael coming out of the desert and gearing up to conquer our land. He shouldn't have an amoral attitude. He shouldn't have this idea that that the Creator isn't on the side of any nation, right? That's like Bilam's attitude. Like the Creator doesn't have a favorite nation. The Creator loves all of humanity, which is true. The Creator loves all of humanity. But there's a specific nation that's his educational tool. There's a certain nation that's his kibyachol human expression that represents him in history. Right? Bilam had trouble with that. Bilam had trouble seeing that, and he should have known better. And that's where we really see Bilam as a villain. That he reduced himself, despite his incredible prophetic gift, he might have related to it only as a gift, right? Not as something that put any responsibility on him to see where the world is meant to go, and maybe even to help guide it that way. Certainly not to stand in the way, to try to obstruct, to try and prevent Israel from fulfilling our mission. But unfortunately, that's what he did, and he had to be killed.